he snapped her cane in two, right there in the park, in front of everyone, leaving a blind woman standing alone and humiliated. What Officer Knox didn't know? Her son is the captain of his precinct, and the moment he shows up, nothing will ever be the same again. Before we continue this powerful story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another powerful story you won't want to miss. The morning began the way Eleanor Price loved most: quiet, unhurried, and awash in golden light. Pinebrook was still half asleep, its maples damp with dew, its maples lining the block like silent guardians. The sun crept gently over the rooftops, casting long shadows that would shrink slowly into themselves as the day warmed. From her bedroom window, she could feel the glow before she ever reached to open the curtain. She didn't need to see it to know it was there. Eleanor moved with the rhythm of someone who had memorized every square inch of her home, not out of necessity, but out of trust. The world had taken her sight, but not her certainty. Each step across her hardwood floors echoed lightly, sure and steady, like her heartbeat. The house responded to her. Floor creaks where James used to laugh, the scent of lavender from the sachets she'd kept in the linen drawer for 20 years, the faint, faraway ticking of the clock he'd given her on their 40th anniversary. She reached the kitchen. Her fingers traced the familiar grooves of the cabinets, the rounded edge of the countertop. She didn't need help. She didn't want help. She had her system, and her system was sacred. She turned on the electric kettle and felt its familiar hum vibrate beneath her fingertips. As the water heated, she ran her hands across the small table in the corner, adjusting the coaster, aligning her favorite ceramic cup just so. It was shaped like a tulip, pale blue. James had picked it out for her when they visited the craft fair in Charleston. She'd traced the rim with her thumb every morning since he passed, drawing strength from that tiny, unbreakable memory. When the kettle clicked, she poured her chamomile tea, a stream of warmth, into porcelain. She brought the cup close, let the steam brush against her face like breath from the past. This was the rhythm of her independence. She was blind, yes, but not broken, not hidden. She had her rituals, and they made her whole. She walked slowly to the small cabinet by the door. Her hand reached for the cane, the one James had chosen, carved from maple, smoothed to perfection, the curve of its handle resting like memory in her palm. She held it gently, like holding his hand again. She stood at the threshold of the front door, took a breath. Today was like any other morning, and like every other morning, she would walk alone to the park, 2 blocks away, the place where she and James once sat, whispering dreams and sharing quiet. She would feel the warmth of the sun, the firmness of the sidewalk beneath her feet, the way her cane tapped out her presence to a world that didn't always see her. But she was here. She had always been here. And today, like every day, she walked toward that truth. The cane wasn't just a tool, it was a language. Each tap against the sidewalk translated the world into something Eleanor could feel. Hedges, curbs, small ridges in the pavement. The breeze brushed her cheeks as she stepped down her front porch, 3 worn wooden planks beneath her feet, her hand brushing the railing her son had reinforced last spring. She didn't need her son today. Not because she didn't love him, not because she wasn't proud, but because this walk was sacred. The journey from her door to the quiet corner of Marigold Park was hers. She'd taken it for 20 years, ever since they moved to Pinebrook, long before James got sick, long before the cane. It had once been their walk, side by side. Now it was her own, kept alive in footfalls and memory. She passed the bushes he'd trimmed every spring, heard the gentle rustle of cardinals overhead. The town might not have noticed her, might have written her off as an old lady with a disability, but this path knew her. The sidewalk was her sanctuary. Each concrete square remembered the rub of her soles and the maple kiss of her cane. As she reached the end of her block, the tap-tap rhythm slowed. Not from fatigue, she was stronger than most assumed, but to savor. Her fingers brushed the fence post that marked the turn, and her mouth curled into a faint smile. She could still picture it. James waiting on the bench, newspaper in hand, pretending to read but always watching her instead. He said she looked regal when she walked, said the world tilted a little when she smiled. She didn't smile as much these days. Still, she walked. She felt the morning heat building under her shawl. The air was gentle, but her body knew time. Her bones carried reminders. She paused only once, near the sycamore where the sidewalk cracked just enough to catch a toe. She knew its edge better than most knew their own driveways. When she resumed, her gait was slower, more deliberate. This wasn't just a walk. It was a prayer. It was a vow to herself and to James. I'm still here. I still remember. A child's laugh echoed from far off. The distant bark of a dog, the quiet hum of a lawnmower starting up. It was the sound of a neighborhood waking up, unaware of the woman weaving through its heartbeat like a seamstress with a silver needle. At the crosswalk before the park, she stopped. Waited. Listened. When the chirping signal began, 5 short pulses, she stepped off the curb and entered the final stretch. The park gates ahead were wide open, the ironwork casting shadows on the sidewalk like lace. Her cane tapped just slightly faster now. She was nearly there. Eleanor entered Marigold Park with a quiet kind of authority, not one granted by others, but the authority of one who had earned her place, who had lived long enough to stop seeking permission. The path bent gently beneath her feet, lined with rows of daffodils, tulips, and the lingering scent of springtime magnolia. Her cane moved in rhythm with the birdsong. She was anchoring herself to the earth. She passed the bench where James had always waited. Its paint was newer now, a deeper chestnut red, donated by the Pinebrook Garden Society in his memory. A small brass plaque on the side read, "In loving honor of James Price, the kindest eyes in Pinebrook." She never sat there, not because she didn't love him, but because sitting still in his absence hurt more than moving forward with him in mind. Instead, she made her way to her favorite spot, just beneath the old elm tree that stretched its branches like open arms. The shade cooled her brow. The ground was firm, and just as she had every Sunday since he passed, Eleanor stopped and turned toward the sun. She took a deep breath, removed her shawl. Then, in one motion both practiced and profound, she lifted the cane and let it rest against the bench. She placed both hands together and closed her eyes. A moment of silence. Then, a whisper. "I miss you." It wasn't loud. It wasn't for anyone else. It wasn't even for James, really. It was for herself, for the version of her who had survived the hospital, the long nights of coughing, the hours spent wiping sweat from his brow, praying the fever would break, for the version who didn't recognize the town anymore without his laugh filling the porch. This was her ritual. A declaration not of grief, but of resilience. And yet, something changed. She heard it, a slow crunch of gravel behind her, not the shuffle of an early jogger, not the patter of a child's feet. It was heavier, intentional. Eleanor didn't turn. She didn't startle. She simply opened her eyes and waited. Because in Pinebrook, the sun was warm. The flowers were blooming. The cane still stood, but even in all that beauty, Eleanor knew something else lingered too. A shift. A presence. A tension in the breeze. It had followed her, she thought. She inhaled again. Slow, measured, and with her next step she picked up the cane and continued forward, tapping, not out of fear, but because her body remembered the terrain. Behind her, unseen eyes lingered. A cruiser's shadow passed through the park's wrought iron gate. Somewhere nearby, a radio crackled. But Eleanor Price didn't run. She moved like the morning, unbothered, unashamed. And as she reached the next curve in the path, the breeze carried the faintest sound, unaware that they were about to make a mistake that would change everything. The cane tapped steadily over gravel as Eleanor made her way under the canopies of early morning light. Birds chirped overhead. The world felt safe, until it didn't. Without warning, the rhythm changed. She froze one step before a fork in the path, her senses alerting to something unseen. The cane slowed. Nearby, heavier footsteps approached, distinct and purposeful. Gravel shifted under boots whose owner didn't flash a badge, but carried an unmistakable patina of authority. Officer Bradley Knox stepped into view. Even at a distance, his uniform caught the light, and his stance held both posture and expectation. He paused a dozen feet away, radio clipped in place, head tilted in that familiar official scrutiny. Eleanor didn't flinch. She held the cane in her right hand, pointed downward but ready. The morning carried her memory of innocence, but here, something was off. "Morning," his voice came, careful and clipped. Not a greeting, but a mission. She tipped her head just enough to acknowledge him. "Good morning, Officer Knox." He shifted a foot, their distance tightening. "I had a concern. This part of the park can be quiet at this hour. I just wanted to make sure you're okay." Her lips curved in a gentle smile, but steady. "I am fine, thank you." His gaze flicked to the cane, then back. "No cane today?" She paused, then said, "I did leave it at home so I could stretch my balance. Just felt up to the challenge this morning." He nodded slowly, eyes trained not on her face, but on the cane's absence. "Right, well, I guess that's your business. Just stay careful." "Of course." Her tone remained calm, dignified. She tapped the cane tip lightly on smooth gravel, measured. The sound was deliberate, holding space in the silence. He studied her expression, searching for vulnerability. Maybe he saw none. He cleared his throat, adjusting the radio, then said, "If you need anything, water, phone, assistance, you just say the word." Beneath the offer, something else hovered, the assumption of her frailty. She inclined her head. "I appreciate that, but truly, I don't need help this morning. I walk this path alone all the time." He nodded, but didn't release his gaze. The air around him stiffened. "Understood. But you know my duty, right?" She looked at him. "I know your role, and I know my own." A flicker of surprise. He hadn't expected that. "Fair enough." He looked away, scanning the tree line. "Well, carry on then." She offered a nod and resumed her walk. Slow, steady, determined. Gravel crunched beneath the cane, her shoulders squared. She refused to let this visit break the morning's rhythm. The officer lingered. The park behind him remained still. He moved a radio button, spoke softly, but his eyes followed Eleanor's retreating form. Authority had its voice, but here something deeper pushed back. They'd met, and the collision wasn't loud. It was subtle, a refusal of presumption, a living assertion. In that pause, passers-by felt it, a clash between expectation and autonomy. They slowed. A jogger halfway across the bridge arched an eyebrow. A father with a stroller slowed his steps, turned back. In every shade of the park, a tension settled. Eleanor reached a bench overlooking the pond, cane tapping twice for each planted foot. She inhaled deeply, chest steady. She reminded herself this was her morning, her space, her independence. She sat. The cane leaned against her side. She closed her eyes. The world resumed around her. Water, birds, distant laughter, sunshine warming her face. But beneath it all, the day had begun with tension, and something unsettled lingered in the air. Officer Knox didn't retreat. He lingered by the trees, pacing slowly near the same bench Eleanor had just claimed. His posture stayed casual, but his presence buzzed like static in the air. It wasn't just about proximity. It was about possession of space. Eleanor adjusted her scarf, trying to reclaim normalcy. She felt his shadow more than his steps. He took a few more strides and settled himself across from her. Not sitting, but standing with folded arms. "You sure you're okay sitting here alone?" She tilted her head, voice calm. Quite sure, thank you. I like this spot. His eyes drifted to the water behind her. Didn't mean to alarm you, just been some concerns lately. Vandalism in the area. Graffiti last week on the far wall. She didn't flinch. That's unfortunate, but I assure you, officer, I'm just resting. Knox scratched the back of his neck. Yeah, I didn't think you had a spray can in that bag. He chuckled, forced. But you know how it is. Gotta check. She kept her gaze level. Certainly. I understand the importance of vigilance. He shifted. May I ask where you're headed next? Her brows rose. Is that a formal question, officer? No. Nell Haste waved his hand. Just conversation. She smiled gently. Then I hope you'll forgive me if I prefer to keep that private. That landed. For a moment, the silence stretched. He cleared his throat. You live around here? Eleanor tapped the cane lightly. I do. This neighborhood's been my home for over 40 years. His eyebrows lifted. Wow, that's impressive. Must have seen a lot change. I have, she said, some for the better. Some still changing. Another pause. Then Knox leaned against a nearby railing. Well, I hope you know I meant no offense. I'm here to protect folks. Her reply was immediate, but measured. Protection starts with respect. Their eyes met. For the first time, something unreadable flickered in his gaze. Uncertainty, perhaps, or discomfort. You remind me of someone, he said, tone softening slightly. A neighbor I had growing up. She used to sit just like that. Same cane, too. Eleanor's voice was warm, but guarded. Then perhaps she taught you how dignity looks. Knox blinked. He wasn't used to that knock pushback from an elderly woman who didn't raise her voice but sharpened it like a needle. Before he could reply, a couple walked past with their dog. The man gave Knox a nod. The woman glanced at Eleanor and slowed. Good morning, Ms. Price, she said kindly. Good morning, Eleanor replied, nodding with grace. Knox turned toward the departing pair. You know a lot of folks around here, huh? Lived here longer than most, Eleanor said, eyes on the pond, and I've never needed permission to be myself in public. That drew a subtle shift in his posture. He exhaled slowly, watching her a moment longer. All right, he said. You take care, ma'am. She gave a polite smile. I always do. As he walked away, she didn't turn to watch. She just sat in silence, hands folded over her cane, posture tall. Her heart beat steady, but in the stillness, she felt the tremble beneath. Not from fear, but from knowing how close dignity had come to being tested. Again. Knox didn't go far. He drifted just out of Eleanor's sightline, pretending to check his radio, his cruiser, anything but the woman he'd just left. But his head turned back more than once, not out of concern, out of calculation. His job, as he saw it, wasn't done. Eleanor stayed still on the bench, fingers tightening slightly on the handle of her late husband's cane. Her smile had faded. The morning air had changed, thickened, like a summer thunderstorm gathering behind clear skies. She knew the difference between presence and surveillance. And now she felt the latter. Across the walkway, a jogger paused to tie her shoe. A man on a bench nearby glanced between Eleanor and the officer. Quiet gestures, but not unnoticed. The dynamic had shifted from solitude to subtle scrutiny. An audience without consent. A child on a scooter slowed down near the edge of the pond, his mother calling out, "Stay close." The woman's eyes lingered briefly on Eleanor and Knox. Not long, but long enough to feel like a measure had been taken, of who belonged, of who was watched. Knox returned, slower this time, less casual. He stopped beside a trash bin a few feet from Eleanor, pretending to check something inside. She spoke first. "Is there something else you need, officer?" He glanced over. "Just making sure everything stays peaceful, ma'am." She tilted her head slightly, face calm. It was peaceful before. Their eyes met again, hers unwavering. his briefly unsteady. Another woman approached from the far path, pushing a stroller. As she passed Eleanor, she smiled warmly, clearly recognizing her. "Ms. Price, I hope the lilies came up strong this spring." "They did, thank you," Eleanor replied, nodding gently. "Right on time." The woman glanced at Knox, then walked on, her smile dimming. Knox stood a little taller. "You seem well known around here." Eleanor turned her face toward the sun. "Not for the reasons you seem to think." He opened his mouth, but whatever he was about to say was interrupted by a cough from behind. An older man, with a Vietnam veteran cap, had been watching from a nearby bench. He rose, took a few steps closer, not too close, but within earshot, and leaned on his own cane. "You good, Miss Price?" he asked loudly. She smiled. "Just enjoying the morning, Mr. Reynolds." He nodded, eyes locked on Knox. "All right then, you let me know." Knox stiffened slightly. The shift was palpable. The presence of witnesses had changed the script. Another officer might have backed off gracefully. Knox doubled down. "I think I'll just walk the perimeter," he muttered, and turned away, but the tension remained like a shadow stitched to the grass. Eleanor sat perfectly still. She could feel it all, the weight of eyes, the shift in balance, the unspoken alert that had begun to ripple through her community. She didn't ask for protection, but people were watching now. And that, she knew, was both a comfort and a warning. "Show me your cane ID." The words cut through the quiet morning like a siren in a cathedral. Eleanor Price, still standing straight despite the heaviness of years behind her eyes, tilted her head slightly. She held her late husband's cane firm in her grasp. The rubber tip rested securely against the path, as if it, too, refused to be moved. Officer Knox stood in front of her, feet planted wide, a clipboard tucked under one arm, but his right hand sat uncomfortably close to the stun gun on his belt. His mirrored sunglasses reflected nothing but the gentle arc of morning light bouncing off Eleanor's hair and the dull metal of her cane. There was no threat, there was no danger, yet suspicion hung in the air like humidity before a thunderstorm. Eleanor blinked slowly. "I'm sorry?" I said. "Show me your cane identification." Knox's voice was a little louder now, a little harder. He shifted forward half a step, just enough to cast a shadow across her shoes. Eleanor's lips parted, but the words didn't come immediately. She could feel the stares around her, the jogger who had stopped tying his shoe, the mother pushing a stroller now slowing to a crawl on the gravel. It was happening again. Not to someone else, not a headline, not a neighbor, but to her. A woman who'd lived through integration and indignity, who had never once needed to prove the right to walk freely. Now, in her 70s, she was being asked for ID, for her cane. She looked down at the polished wood in her hand. "There's no such thing as cane identification," she said evenly, eyes returning to his. "Not in Georgia. Not under any federal ADA guidance." Knox's lip curled slightly. "I didn't ask for a legal lecture. I asked for documentation. I need to verify you're authorized to carry that." "Carry it," Eleanor repeated softly, as if trying to confirm she hadn't misheard. "This isn't a firearm, officer. It's a cane. I am blind. This is not a threat. It's a lifeline." Knox took another step forward. He was close now, too close. The breeze no longer passed between them. The weight of the moment sat squarely on Eleanor's back, but she didn't bow. She didn't break. The wind tugged gently at her cardigan, and the light filtered through the leaves above them, but the air had turned thick, dangerous. The mother with the stroller had stopped now, standing on the edge of the path, arms wrapped protectively around her child. Eleanor could feel her eyes, and others, silent witnesses. None moved. Eleanor's grip on the cane didn't tighten. It didn't need to. Her strength wasn't in clenched fists. It lived in her stillness, in the way she held her ground without shouting, in the way she stood as though the dirt itself would rise up to protect her if needed. But she wasn't naive. She'd been alive long enough to see dignity treated like a weapon, quiet, mistaken for guilt. and blindness interpreted as vulnerability. "You don't have the authority to demand anything," she said, her voice calm but firm, its cadence shaped by years of Sunday school teaching and courtroom observation. "You have the responsibility to protect, and right now, you're not protecting anyone. You're just harassing an old woman with a cane." Knox chuckled, a short, bitter sound that barely left his throat. "Harassment? Ma'am, I'm just doing my job. About exterior report about someone behaving suspiciously in the area. You match the description." Her brow furrowed gently. "You received a report about a 72-year-old black woman walking through a park using a mobility cane. That's your suspicious person?" He didn't answer. She didn't expect him to. Instead, she shifted slightly, angling her body so the nearest bystander, a teenager sitting on a park bench, with earbuds dangling from one ear, could see her profile more clearly. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't running. Let them all see. "I've walked this path every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 10 years, she said. "My late husband helped design that playground over there. He died on this very path from a heart attack. I come here because this place reminds me of him. I come here to remember that love lasts longer than breath." The silence that followed felt thick with gravity. Knox adjusted his belt, his posture growing more defensive than assertive now. Still, he didn't back down. "Maybe," he said slowly, "but I need to ensure this is all above board. Maybe it's not about the cane. Maybe it's about identification, period." She tilted her head again. "You want my state ID now?" "Is that a problem?" he shouted. "No," Eleanor said, "but the difference between a request and an order means everything, and I'd like it noted that you're shifting your reasoning as we speak." By now, 2 more people had stopped. One older man on a bicycle had removed his helmet. Another woman, middle-aged and carrying a yoga mat, had paused near the entrance to the park. The attention was gathering, but the weight wasn't crushing Eleanor. It was lifting her. It made her voice more certain, her spine straighter, her presence unmistakable. Knox noticed it too. He scanned the park and saw eyes watching. Some were recording. His jaw tensed. Eleanor reached into her purse slowly, deliberately, her movements practiced like choreography. She pulled out her state ID and held it out, not like an offering, but like a challenge. "You are free to read it," she said, "but if you lay a hand on me without cause, you'll be reading your own name in the paper by morning." Officer Knox didn't reach for the ID. Not yet. He hovered, eyes narrowing, one hand still near his utility belt, as if proximity alone conferred authority. He stared at Eleanor's outstretched hand like it was a trap. In that moment, it wasn't a card she held. It was her autonomy, her history, her right to exist without suspicion. A breeze rustled through the trees. Leaves whispered above, indifferent to the confrontation below. The cane remained steady in Eleanor's other hand, resting against the gravel, unmoved by fear or force. "I said," she repeated, "you may read it." She wasn't shaking, she wasn't blinking, and suddenly Knox looked smaller. A mother pushing a stroller paused 10 feet away, adjusting her sunglasses as her toddler babbled in the seat. She didn't move on, her eyes locked on the scene with a mixture of concern and disbelief. More footsteps crunched to a halt nearby. There were now 5, maybe 6 people surrounding them. None spoke. The air was heavy with unspoken questions. Knox shifted again, caught in a moment that had spiraled out of the control he thought he had. He took the ID with 2 fingers, barely glancing before returning it. "Name's Eleanor Price," he muttered. "You could have asked politely from the start," she replied. No venom, no sarcasm, just truth. Knox bristled, but before he could respond, the toddler in the stroller pointed a finger and said something no one expected. "Lady Strong," the child chirped, drawing an involuntary laugh from the mother. That laugh broke the tension. Not entirely, but enough to remind everyone that this wasn't just a scene. It was a moment of reckoning. Knox cleared his throat and took a step back. "You can go." "I was always free to go," Eleanor corrected gently. He turned without another word and walked toward his cruiser, his posture stiffer than when he'd arrived. The moment lingered. The bystanders remained still, watching Eleanor more than him. She didn't move immediately. She let the silence land, let it mean something. Then she turned her head toward the sounds around her, the leaves, the distant bark of a dog, the slight cry of a blue jay overhead. Her world was alive, textured, resonant. She didn't need eyes to see what had just unfolded. She felt it in her bones, in the tightness behind her ribs, in the pulse behind her ear. As she resumed her walk, tapping her cane with poise, the crowd subtly parted to let her through. No applause, no cheers, just a quiet reverence, and in that reverence lived the truth. She had done more than stand her ground. She had reminded an entire park of what dignity looks like when it refuses to bend. Her steps continued forward, deliberate, defiant, undeniably free. The moment hung suspended. Eleanor's cane tapped the gravel beneath her feet as she took steady steps toward the oak bench. Each tap a testament to decades of independence. Birds chirped overhead, sunlight dappled through turning autumn leaves, and for a heartbeat, the boots struck harder, faster, crunching closer. Officer Knox emerged from behind the tree line with mechanical certainty. His uniform was crisp, badge gleaming, mouth set in a tight line. He carried himself with an air of control, as if he'd been waiting for Eleanor's routine, rehearsed and ready. That's when the shift happened. No strangely greeting this time. Instead, a step forward, hand inches from the cane. "Ma'am," he said, same clipped tone, now harder. "I told you to show me that cane ID." Eleanor paused. She felt the air densify. She'd known the rules: White Cane Act rights, blind person identification card, her own sense of dignity. "I had every right to be here," she said softly, voice calm. Knox's face hardened. He lunged, fast, unexpected. One hand shot out and slammed against her forearm. The other snatched for the cane. Eleanor recoiled, surprise flashing through her body, a gasp in the throat that broke the morning stillness. The cane tipped, then snapped. Eleanor's world shattered in a sound sharp and cruel. The ivory-handled cane hit gravel, splitting cleanly at its center. She stumbled, the wrong elbow raised instinctively. She didn't fall. She couldn't. Not when so much was at stake. But in that reckless motion, dear memories spilled. The Bible lay open in her tote. She'd tucked it there after lighting her usual candle at church. It tumbled free, pages rustling. A quiet prayer undone. The edges caught on grass and concrete as two people instinctively stepped forward. A young mother with a stroller and a jogger paused mid-stride. Knox's tone boiled over. "Move, ma'am," he barked. His grip tightened on her wrist. Eleanor pressed a hand to her chest, heart hammering. She sensed every eye in the park, turning as his other hand jerked her toward the brick wall by the old bookstore. She remembered her husband's words, "Walk proud." But pride doesn't weigh much when your arm is gripped by force, your cane broken at your feet. The Bible lay open, spine cracked, Psalm 23 staring at the sky. "Let me go," she said quietly. But his forearm pressed hard on her upper arm. She could feel the pull. She was pinned to stone, both literal and symbolic. The dust from the wall brushed her dress. No one moved. The jogger's breath stayed suspended. The stroller's wheels halted. Just the morning song of sparrows, the only sound left. Her breathing stopped first because of shock, then because the world felt clipped, like a picture missing its frame. The park's quiet became a weight, pressing from all directions, compressing her dignity. He leaned in. "Last warning," he hissed near her ear. "Hand over your cane ID now." Eleanor shook her head once. "What did I do?" Her words slipped out in a whisper, soft but resonant. Powdered dust fell from her sleeve. The smell of earth and stone filled her senses. Her heart pounded, chest tight. She fought the urge to speak again, to explain her identity, her years of independence. Instead, she held back, her presence anchored to every memory of faith, marriage, survival. Because power doesn't break with words, it fractures dignity with force. The jogger shifted, the mother clutched her child tighter. Someone clicked a phone camera, and Knox stared, still rigid, still in control, but Eleanor's silence began to generate a ripple. She couldn't see the faces behind her, but she could feel the tension, the shift in air. The park was no longer quiet. It was witness. He released her wrist abruptly. She gasped, stepping back. The two broken cane halves lay between them, cast aside like a failed shield. The Bible lay abandoned. Eleanor steadied herself on the bench's armrest. She closed her eyes for a moment, steadied her breath. Her lips pressed tight, her shoulders lifted. She wasn't crying yet, but every muscle was gathering great. The cop took a breath, rhetorical, uncertain. He unclipped a bat out of his body cam. Not yet. He didn't drop his posture, but the moment had changed. A mother muttered. He'd just snapped her cane. The jogger cursed under his breath. The air felt thick with evidence now. Bronze tension, rising energy. Eleanor opened her eyes. She surveyed the park, the witness faces, the fallen Bible, the cane in pieces. No words escaped her, but she didn't need them. She had already spoken, with her presence, with her stillness. Officer Knox's breath was shallow now, lips pressed together in a tight line of control, just barely holding. His hand twitched at his side. Then, in a motion that felt both rehearsed and irrational, he stepped toward Eleanor again. Without a word, he raised his forearm and braced it across her upper chest, pinning her lightly but firmly against the cool surface of the brick bookstore wall. She exhaled in a choked breath, short, surprised. The soft floral pattern of her dress crumpled beneath the weight of his arm. Her bones ached from the pressure. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't confusion. This was a deliberate act, born not from fear but from authority turned feral. Her face turned slightly, cheek brushing the brick. "You don't have the right," she whispered, but her words fell between the cracks in his restraint. Her left hand rose instinctively, not in resistance, but in search of air. Her breath became shallow, strangled under his weight. She gasped once. "Back up," a voice shouted. It came from the crowd. An older man now standing still with a folded newspaper in his hand. Another person pulled out their phone. The mother by the stroller had already started recording. She whispered to her child, "It's okay, baby," but her eyes never left the officer's forearm. The quiet resolve Eleanor had carried for decades was being squeezed out of her. Still, she didn't struggle, not out of submission, but discipline. Her silence, once peaceful, had become a form of resistance. Knox's voice was lower now. "Why are you resisting?" "Not," she gasped. Her breath shortened again. "I'm just breathing." That was it, just those 5 words. But in the stillness of the park, those 5 words cracked the air. The mother's phone captured it. The jogger had stepped closer. "You're hurting her," he said, voice firm. "She didn't do anything." Knox shifted slightly, as if waking from a fog of anger. But his arm didn't move. Not yet. Eleanor leaned her head back, rested it fully against the brick wall behind her. Her eyes closed again, not from fear, but from memory. Her husband had once warned her, "Don't let their power define your breath." A few more moments passed, like years. Then he stepped back, his forearm releasing. She inhaled hard, coughing once, lifting a hand to her neck. The bruises weren't visible yet, but they were growing beneath her skin. She didn't collapse. She stood, one hand pressed to her chest, the other bracing on the wall. Her cane was still in pieces on the ground, but her composure remained whole. The park was no longer an audience. It had become a courtroom. The people stood still, quiet, watching. Judgment was not yet spoken, but it was felt. A teenager on a bike paused and whispered to a friend, "Is she okay?" Another man dialed 911. Knox took one step back. His posture had changed. His hands now rested stiffly by his sides, no longer reaching. His authority didn't look clean anymore. It looked exposed. Eleanor didn't speak. She bent up one half of her broken cane. The crack along the shaft was clean, violent, unforgivable. She held it for a moment, stared at the symbol it once was, then she picked up the other half. Still no tears, just dignity. The Bible remained on the ground nearby. Someone stepped forward to retrieve it, but Eleanor extended her hand, signaling gently she would get it herself. As she lowered to one knee, every breath in the park hitched. Her hand stretched toward the book, lifting it from the grass with reverence. She closed it softly, running her fingers over the cover. Then she rose, slowly, gracefully, as if reclaiming every inch of ground that had been taken. Behind her, the crowd stood still. In that moment, time did not move forward. It paused. It recorded. It remembered. And nothing, not broken canes or pressed forearms, could silence what everyone had now seen. The sound of tires screeching shattered the tense silence of Rosewood Park. Gravel flew outward, settling over the cracked pieces of Eleanor's cane, scattered on the ground. Within seconds, a black SUV came to a halt at the park entrance, doors swinging open before the engine had even idled down. Lieutenant Darren Price stepped out, badge gleaming in the early morning light, his posture straight and purposeful. His dark uniform contrasted sharply against the pale dawn, a visual declaration. He had arrived, and he meant business. Cameras sprung to life. A nearby teenager, phone already recording Eleanor's encounter, directed the lens toward Darren's determined face. His jaw was set, eyes unwavering. In that moment, everything shifted. He moved past the crowd, mostly passive until now, but parted through them like thunder through clouds. Their curiosity rippled into attention as he reached Eleanor first. He knelt, gently placing his hand at her elbow. "Mom, are you all right?" She nodded, voice soft as paper. "I'm fine." She steadied herself on the broken cane, the sharp edges hidden from view, then let Darren lead her away from the wall, but still within view. That's when he turned toward Officer Knox. His voice cut through the air like steel. "Officer Knox, step back." Knox stood still for a moment, shock registering in his eyes as the uniformed officer from the same department reclaimed authority over the scene. Darren's tone was neither accusatory nor pleading. It was procedural, firm, incontestable. "You heard me." The crowd collectively exhaled. The park's atmosphere that had crackled with dread now tightened with anticipation. Knox's shoulders dropped fractionally. His forearm loosened its hold. Darren rose, positioning himself between Eleanor and Knox, and squared his shoulders, like a shield. As Knox finally stepped back, Darren surveyed the crowd. Mothers held their children closer. Passers-by raised their phones in solidarity. Even joggers paused. Eleanor watched her son, pride flickering behind the shock. Darren glanced at her and offered a reassuring nod. In that charged moment, roles reversed. Darren, and by extension, justice, stood fully between abuse and innocence. The crowd understood the significance, the first crack in the illusion of unquestioned power, the emergence of protection from within the same uniform. Deep in his core, Darren knew this confrontation would not be the last. Knox receded, but the tension remained. This public rescue planted seeds of confrontation within the police culture, wounds that may fester or heal. Still, in that moment, the tide had turned, not with violence, but with presence, accountability, and a mother's dignity reclaimed. Darren's voice, low and firm, echoed off the nearby brick wall. "Step back, Officer Knox." It was not a request. It was a command, grounded in law, drenched in righteous fury, and spoken with the full weight of authority. But it wasn't the tone of a superior that landed the blow. It was the unmistakable voice of a son watching his mother be humiliated in public. Knox hesitated, eyes narrowing. He glanced at the badge clipped to Darren's chest, then at Eleanor, whose trembling fingers now clutched the broken remains of the cane. Knox's nostrils flared slightly, but he took a half-step back, unsure. Then his hand dropped away from his holster entirely. Darren stepped forward again, into the space Knox had just occupied, and placed himself fully between the officer and his mother. "Explain yourself," he said, calm but cold. Knox cleared his throat, the bravado draining. "I received a report, a call about a suspicious person walking with a stick near the benches." "A suspicious person," Darren repeated, lifting one eyebrow. "So, you approached a blind elderly woman, alone, with her cane, and you grabbed her?" "She wouldn't answer my questions," Knox muttered, his confidence returning in the form of defensiveness. "She got belligerent. She refused to show identification." "It's blind," Darren shot back, "and walking in a public park with a cane. There is no law in this state requiring anyone to show ID just because you're uncomfortable." "Next." "Did she break the law?" Darren interrupted. "Did she commit a crime? Was she threatening anyone?" Silence. "Did she raise her voice, Officer Knox?" Darren pressed, louder now. "Did she use force against you? Resist arrest?" Knox looked away. "That's what I thought." Darren turned to the onlookers, now gathering with increased interest. "Did anyone here see my mother threaten this officer?" he called out. Murmurs of "no" and "she didn't do anything" swept through the crowd like wind through tall grass. Darren faced Knox again, taking a breath. "You escalated an encounter with a disabled senior citizen who was breaking no laws. You broke her cane. You shoved her into a wall. You humiliated her in public. Do you understand what that is?" Knox didn't respond. "That's not policing," Darren said quietly. "That's intimidation. That misconduct." A woman in the back whispered, "That's assault." Another man nodded, filming all of it. Darren locked eyes with Knox. "You're lucky I didn't show up 10 seconds later, because I wouldn't be speaking to you in uniform. I'd be reacting as her son, and you wouldn't be standing so calmly." Knox shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the phones pointed in his direction. "Leave the area," Darren said at last. "Now." Knox hesitated again. "I'll be filing a report." "You do that," Darrow replied, "and I'll be filing one of my own, with internal affairs, with legal counsel, with media, if necessary. Now get out of here." For the first time, Knox's expression cracked into visible uncertainty. He backed away, each step slower than the last. The weight of being watched, recorded, and checked by another officer, in front of a crowd, landed heavy. As he disappeared down the trail, Darian finally turned back to his mother. Her chin was high, her silence thunderous, her dignity intact. Darren knelt beside her, still in uniform, but now just a son. He gently picked up the broken cane from the ground, cradling it like something sacred. It was splintered just below the curve, the smooth wood cracked where Knox's boot had pinned it. He held it out to Eleanor, but she didn't reach for it. Her hand was still clenched, not in fear, but in restraint. She didn't want the symbol of her husband, her late partner, her daily ritual, returned to her in pieces. Darren stood again and slowly offered his hand. Eleanor placed her fingers in his, steady and proud, and he helped her up. The crowd hadn't left. In fact, it had grown. Cell phones hovered, but no one spoke for a long moment. The silence was reverent, not just for the injustice they'd witnessed, but for the weight of what had just shifted. For the first time in a long while, Pinebrook saw the system fracture in real time. Not in a courtroom, not in a policy memo, but in a public park, where a white officer was commanded to retreat by a black captain in defense of a black woman who happened to be his mother. The dynamic was unmistakable. Darren looked around, his voice strong. "If anyone here recorded what happened, please don't delete it. What you saw wasn't just an incident, it was evidence." A woman near the fountain spoke up. "I got it all. He was out of line. She didn't do nothing. Another man added, "He put hands on her. No call for that." Eleanor turned her face toward the voices, listening. Not flinching, not shrinking. A young boy clutched his mother's hand nearby. "Mom, who is she?" he whispered. The mother bent down, replying softly, "She's someone you remember. That's what matters." In that moment, Eleanor became more than just the target of an incident. She became a living reminder that even dignity, when quiet and deliberate, can overpower aggression. Darren helped guide her toward the bench. Slowly, proudly. He didn't shield her from the crowd. He walked beside her, badge gleaming in the mid-morning sun, every step echoing accountability. A news van pulled around the far corner. Someone must have called it. Darren took note, but said nothing. Let them come. Let them see. Eleanor sat, her posture straight, her face composed. Darren knelt again. "Are you hurt?" "Nishi," she replied. "Just interrupted." He smiled, the sadness still there, simmering beneath the surface. "You didn't deserve that." "No," she agreed. "But I've survived worse than boots and questions. I was born in Mississippi, remember?" His throat tightened. "I do." Her hand touched his cheek. "Don't let them turn you into them." "I won't," he promised. The breeze returned. The birds, quiet earlier, resumed their song. Children resumed their laughter at the playground. But for everyone who had seen what happened, nothing would be the same. They had witnessed more than conflict. They had witnessed a rupture, and in it the beginning of something none of them would be able to unsee. Dawn's sharp morning light reflects off dozens of phone screens raised in unison. Faces, drawn tight with tension, illuminate against the glow links. Gasps, murmurs captured moment by moment. The phone's gentle hum becomes a chorus of civic witnessing. Tap to record, zoom in, record again. No camera rehearsed this scene, yet every frame pulses with urgency. We shift through perspectives. A teenager at the edge of the sidewalk, her fingers trembling as she framed the unfolding confrontation. A jogger slows, halfway down the path, phone in hand, her earbuds dangling, now obsolete. A mother by the stroller holds her child close, phone up, eyes fixed on her mother's dignity under siege. Each swipe and shift, each sudden realization, this moment is bigger than them. The rawness of cell phone footage gives this scene unfiltered power. One lens catches the flash of Darren's braking truck tire, screeching rubber meeting pavement, reality ripping open. Another lens catches Eleanor's cane splintering against the gravel. Instantly after Knox lunges, it snaps, with audible clarity. A third phone captures Darren stepping forward, the camera swiveling quickly as he confronts Knox. In a single split second, dozens of phones record the same sequence. Authority challenged, violence confronted, rescue arriving. It's not just evidence, it's a collective heartbeat. We see Knox's posture stiffen as cameras press in. We see Darren's determined stride, caught from angles both low and high. We even glimpse reflection of the scene on the cracked cell phone glass, layering moments, what was happening, and who was watching. To a close view, Eleanor clutches the broken cane, one trembling hand holding the other steady. Her composure is quiet but powerful. Someone is there for her, but she didn't cower. The phone magnifies every breath she takes. There's a pause between two captures, where you can hear the hum of the phones, the twitter of birds in the trees, and underneath it all, a community awake. Then, the moment recorded is already uploading. A screen shows uploading, 12%, as alerts ping on social feeds. A local news aggregator's watermark springs up. A cyclist stops, then holds his phone higher, speaking directly into its mic. This just happened in the park. In less than 15 seconds, the video leaps from on-scene emotion to digital propagation. These aren't just devices. They're civic lungs breathing out outrage, exposure, possibility. On-screen overlays flash, trending, breaking, share. And then, before the montage fully resolves, the screen cuts to Darren calling into his phone, breath held tight. Badge number ID now. The air in the park feels carved from glass, fragile, sharp, and waiting to shatter. Darren's voice slices through the static hum of murmurs and phones. Not raised, not trembling, controlled, but it hits like thunder anyway. Officer, I need your badge number and your ID, now. His words land like courtroom orders, not street requests. He doesn't blink, doesn't flinch. The black jacket of his uniform is dusted with early morning pollen, but the gold nameplate glints like a seal of moral authority. Knox stiffens, permanently confused, then defensive. His eyes dart left, catching the glint of multiple phones trained on him. Now zoomed in. The tilt of his chin shifts, slightly unsure. What's your name? Darren presses again, voice steady. Badge, number, ID. Knox opens his mouth, his jaw locked between obedience and ego. Why? Who exactly are he? He blurts. Darren steps forward. I'm Captain Darren Price, Internal Oversight, Pinebrook, PE. I'm also her son. His voice dips on the last three words, not quieter, but heavier. A beat passes. It ripples. People feel it like a bass note through the soles of their feet. Gasps spark through the crowd, tiny, stifled, but unmistakably audible. Knox falters. His hand, which had been near his holster earlier, now hovers in midair as if forgotten. He mutters a number, clipped and reluctant. 136 or other. Officer Nathan Knox. Darren's gaze doesn't waver. And your ID? Knox pulls his wallet from his back pocket like a man forced to surrender. He flips it open with a snap, holds up the laminated card between thumb and forefinger. Darren doesn't even step closer, just lifts his phone and snaps a photo. Thank you, Darren said, still calm. You're being documented, and you're being reported. You can't, Knox begins. I just did, Darren replies, not looking at him. A sharp hush swallows the space around them. Eleanor hasn't spoken a word since Darren arrived, but now she adjusts her posture. She's upright. Her shoulder no longer curves inward. Her lips are parted slightly, not with words, but breath returning. She watches her son, not just as a rescuer, but a man built from the very bones of her survival. Her presence holds more weight now. Knox's body language shrinks. He steps back, one half step at a time, glancing toward the approaching sergeant still weaving through the bystanders. Darren turns once more toward his mother. Are you hurt? Eleanor shakes her head gently, then lifts the broken cane. Just this, she says softly. And what he tried to take? Darren nods. He doesn't need more explanation. Her dignity was the first thing under siege, and now, in front of cameras and community, it's being returned, not by system alone, but by blood and memory and resolve. The sergeant approaches quickly now, cutting through the watchers like a current through still water. He's younger than Knox, clean-shaven, with the chest radio crackling low. His badge reads S. Gibbs, L. Ramirez. He slows as he sees Darren, registering the stance, the rank, the raw atmosphere. E.g. Ramirez, Darren calls out, voice clipped but professional. You've walked into an active misconduct report. I've just requested badge and ID. This officer has been recorded verbally confronting, then physically assaulting, a civilian, this woman, Eleanor Price, my mother. Ramirez pauses, takes in Knox's rigid stance, the cane on the ground, and Eleanor's bruised dignity. The sergeant's jaw tightens, but he nods. Copy that, Captain Price. The tone shifts, not a moment of uncertainty, just order being reestablished, not by force, but by clarity. Ramirez steps closer to Knox, quietly instructs him to stand down, and signals another officer to step in as witness. The transition happens fast, but not fast enough to erase what's already been captured. The crowd ripples. People whisper names to each other now. That's Eleanor Price, a woman says. She's blind. Another replies. That's her son, Captain Darren, police captain. Phones rise higher. Angles sharpen. Videos keep rolling. In the middle of it, Eleanor stands. Her cane is broken, but she clutches the heavier half in her hand like a truth too long ignored. Her fingers tremble, just faintly, but she's no longer crouched by the weight of fear. She's rising again, like she has time and time before. Darren places a steadying hand on her elbow, not guiding her, not protecting her, but honoring her presence. She lifts her chin slightly. The late morning sun drapes across her face. Her glasses catch a beam of light, and for a moment, it's impossible not to look at her and see strength forged in silence. Someone in the crowd whispers, "She's the one who runs that community class for kids." Another adds, "I've seen her walking this route for years." Recognition spreads, not just of injustice, but of who she is and what she's meant to this place. The story isn't just beginning, it's snapping into focus. What Knox tried to erase has become impossible to ignore. Then the moment crystallizes. A bystander, holding his phone high, turns the lens on Darren and Eleanor. In the background, the batch numbers are visible. The broken cane is in the frame. The officer, now quiet, stands apart. The sergeant talks into his radio, layered by murmurs and gasps. The shot is framed like a painting, motion in stillness, truth wrapped in pause. It will be posted within minutes. It will cross timelines like wildfire. It will trend, because it captures not just an incident, but a reckoning. The price of silence has been too high, and the receipts, this time, are in everyone's pocket. The sun hadn't yet cleared the rooftops when the call came in. It wasn't a reporter or a councilman or some high-profile lawyer ringing the Internal Affairs office. It was Captain Darren Price, direct, controlled, but not calm. "This is Captain Darren Price, badge 6029. I'm reporting a use-of-force incident involving Officer Thomas Knox that occurred this morning in Pinebrook Park at approximately 7:42 a.m. The sergeant on duty, an older white man named Morrow, tried to keep his voice neutral. "Is this an in-house matter, or are you formally escalating it?" "I'm escalating," Darren said without pause. "There is crowd footage, multiple civilian witnesses, and I was present during the detainment of a disabled elderly black woman. That woman was my mother." Silence. On the other end of the line, Morrow shifted in his seat, suddenly aware of the stakes. Darren could hear the hesitation in his voice when he finally replied. "Understood. We'll open an investigation immediately. I'm requesting body cam footage be pulled within the hour." Knox's conduct was aggressive, disproportionate, and unprovoked. I believe he violated multiple department policies, and I expect a full internal audit. I'm also recommending immediate suspension pending review. Morrow didn't ask who Darren's mother was. He didn't have to. The story had already begun to circulate like a windstorm through the department, first as a whisper, then a stunned silence. Now a growing wave of nervous scrambling behind closed doors. Half the brass knew Eleanor Price by name. The other half knew her by her son's reverence. "Copy that, Captain," Morrow said at last. "You'll receive confirmation of suspension procedures within the next hour. This is being taken seriously." "Make sure it is," Darren said, and hung up. He stood in the quiet hallway just outside his office. A beat passed, then another. His hand clenched into a fist, and, for a second, his eyes shut tight. Not just as a son, not just as a cop, but as a man walking both paths, and realizing how deeply broken one of them had become. A low vibration hummed in his chest pocket. Another call, another message. The city was waking up, and with it, the storm. At that moment, in a windowless room across the precinct, Officer Knox sat with arms folded tight over his chest. He hadn't removed his belt, his radio still clipped to his shoulder. He hadn't been told yet, but he knew. He saw the cell phones, he saw the crowd gathering, he saw Darren Price's face and understood, too late, that this wasn't going to be brushed off or buried like so many others before. Internal Affairs was already preparing the intake paperwork. The protocol was clear. Immediate administrative leave for reviewable useful incidents with racial or disability implications, especially when captured on video. Knox's record, spotty with complaints but protected for years by silence and excuses, was about to be reopened. And this time, it wouldn't be in the shadows. It would be on record. And it had begun. By mid-morning, the email hit Officer Knox's inbox like a gavel falling. Administrative suspension, notification, right to voluntary extradition, effective immediately. Reason: pending investigation of alleged use of force violation in public space. Do not report to active duty. Turn in service weapon, badge, and ID to the supervising officer by 12:00 p.m. Knox stared at the message for a full 30 seconds. His lips parted, but no sound came out. It was as if something had sucked the air straight from the room. No noise, no chatter from the bullpen. Even the usual hum of printers and tapping of keys faded to a background blur. He read it again, slowly. Then his chair scraped back, sharp and sudden, the kind of sound that made people turn their heads. His boots clomped across the tile floor with a heavy rhythm. He didn't wait for backup, didn't ask questions. He just walked the long hallway toward the supervisor's office, jaw clenched, shoulders squared, eyes like stone. By the time he got to the window, Sergeant Ames was already standing. "Don't make this difficult," Ames said, holding a cardboard box. Knox didn't speak. He placed his badge inside. He looked at it for a beat, longer than necessary, then set it down. Silence. Outside, the shift was changing. Officers walked past, some pretending not to see. Others slowed just long enough to exchange a glance of relief for some, confusion for others. And in a few eyes, a flicker of resentment, not at Knox, but at the fact that this time the rules were being enforced. Inside Eleanor Price's small home on the east end of town, the world moved differently. Her porch was still. The light breeze rustled through a hanging fern. Her bruises, visible now in the softer morning light, had turned a deep violet. She hadn't put on makeup. She hadn't touched her hair. She hadn't even moved far from the window. But she had her Bible beside her, her tea cooling on the table. Her cane, now wrapped with gauze where it had cracked in the fall, leaned against the chair. The phone had rung 4 times already. She hadn't answered once. Not the reporters, not the friends, not the pastor, not even her neighbor June, who called just to say she was proud of her. Because Eleanor Price didn't need to speak. The footage was already speaking for her. In the park, in the street, online, her story had a life now that didn't require commentary. And somehow, that was more powerful than any interview or news segment could ever be. She chose quiet instead. Not silence. Quiet. Because dignity didn't always roar. Sometimes it just sat still and waited for the rest of the world to catch up. And on that day, the world had no choice but to start catching up. One suspension, one raised voice, one recorded truth at a time. Captain Darren Price stood in front of the full-length glass window of the Pinebrook Police Department's administrative wing. Beyond the glass, officers moved between squad cars. Civilians waited with clipped voices in the lobby, and a flag rustled in the breeze. But Darren's focus was razor-sharp, aimed not at the scene outside but at the door behind him, Sheriff Banning's office. He didn't knock. He opened the door and walked in. Sheriff Banning looked up, already expecting him. He wore the expression of a man who'd been fielding calls since sunrise. His tie was loose, his coffee was cold, and his patience had been drained. "You saw the footage," Darren said without preamble. Banning exhaled. "I've seen a dozen angles. We've suspended Knox. Internal Affairs is on it." "That's not enough," Darren said, stepping forward. "This isn't just about Knox. This is about the culture that let it happen. You and I both know he didn't invent that posture. He absorbed it." Banning stiffened. "Be careful, Darren." "I am," Darrell said calmly. "That's exactly why I am here." He placed a thick folder on Banning's desk. Printed reports, data, past complaints, patterns, red flags that had been ignored or buried in bureaucracy. "These are just the ones I could compile in 36 hours, Darren said. "What do you think I'll find in 36 days? Banning didn't touch the folder. "You want to burn the department down?" Darren replied. "I want to rebuild it, but I'm not going to pretend it's solid if the foundation's cracked." There was a long pause, a silence filled with tension, respect, and something else. Fear. Banning finally said. "They're not just angry," Darren corrected. "They are awake. You saw the crowd at the park. You saw the comments online. This won't be brushed under the rug. And if we try, we become the story." Banning leaned back, the weight of his position heavy on his shoulders. "What do you want?" "Public commitment to review use of force protocols, a civilian oversight committee with real teeth, and no more quietly reassigning problem officers. They go on record, or they go out the door." "And if I say no?" "Then I go public," Darren said evenly, "with the files, with the names, with the patterns, and I won't be alone." That last sentence hung in the air like a loaded weapon, not a threat, an inevitability. Banning nodded slowly. "Let me think." "Don't think too long," Darren said. "The town already is." Outside the office, the station was no longer business as usual. Conversations slowed when Darren walked past. Some officers gave him nods of quiet approval. Others looked away. A few, hardened by pride or fear, glared. Darren noticed every reaction. He didn't flinch. He knew reform was a fight, and the first battleground was always internal. But what mattered most was this: he wasn't walking back. He wasn't compromising. Because his mother had bled for this. Because silence had cost too much. And because in a world filled with uniforms, someone finally needed to wear one, with accountability stitched into every seam. The morning after the disciplinary announcement, the streets of Pinebrook were not quiet. They hummed. Not with traffic or lawnmowers, but with the sound of voices rising. Stories began to surface. Not from news anchors or editorial columns, but from front porches, barbershops, and school drop-off lines. A teenage boy recounted being stopped for matching a description, his only offense. A hoodie and a slight stammer. His mother posted the encounter online, her voice shaking as she described how the officer made her son remove the sweatshirt in 30-degree weather while holding his hands in the air. A retired teacher, white-hiled and wheelchair-bound, shared that she'd once been told she couldn't access her own mailbox without proving her address because some folks steal mailboxes too. Another young woman described being pulled over 3 times in 1 month on her drive home from work, only to be told she seemed nervous. Each post ended the same way: "Now I know I wasn't alone." The story spread quickly, not through the usual rumor chains, but through deliberate, aching vulnerability. The town's wounds were old, but now they were visible, and visibility brought fire. There were tears, yes, but also a strange clarity. People were tired of fear, tired of silence, tired of thinking their pain was a one-time exception. Eleanor read these stories from her living room, one hand resting lightly on the broken cane that had become a symbol in the town. She did not speak to journalists who requested interviews. She declined every invitation for a live television segment. "I don't need lights," she told Darren. "I need something to change." Her quiet refusal to make it about herself did something unexpected. It turned the spotlight back where it belonged, on the system. Her restraint, her silence, her refusal to become a spectacle, added a moral weight to everything others were now saying. It made it harder for local leaders to dismiss the rising tide as nihilists. It made it harder for residents on the fence to pretend it wasn't real. Meanwhile, Darren watched the movement swell with equal parts pride and pressure. Pride, because he saw Pinebrook was stirring, but pressure, because it stirred toward him. Every phone call, every meeting, every door knock ended with the same question. So what are you going to do about it? He understood now that this wasn't just about his mother or about Knox. This was about every moment that went unspoken, every apology that came too late, every resident who had to shrink to survive in the town they helped build. By midweek, a rally had been announced, not by a politician, not by a non-profit, but by a group of high schoolers who had watched the video of Eleanor's cane being broken and decided they couldn't unsee it. The rally would be held on the courthouse steps Friday evening, just before sunset, a time when everyone in Pinebrook would be able to see who showed up and who didn't. The kids called it Rally at the Heart. It would be more than a protest. It would be a reckoning, and this time, Eleanor would not walk alone. The air on Friday evening had a heaviness to it, not from heat, but from anticipation. A line of folding chairs had been arranged in front of the courthouse steps, facing a makeshift podium draped in cloth. Local pastors, teachers, and small business owners stood talking in low tones, while volunteers handed out bottled water and clipboards. It wasn't flashy, but it was intentional. People were here for change, not a show. And still, everyone looked for Eleanor. Some had expected her to appear in a wheelchair, perhaps escorted by aides or shielded behind a lectern. Others expected her to arrive quietly and leave just as quietly. What they did not expect was the image that cut through the murmuring crowd and brought everything to a hush. Eleanor Price, her spine straight, her head high, and her white cane firmly in hand, stepped from the back of the courthouse walkway and made her way toward the front, alone, walking slowly but deliberately. The broken cane had been replaced by one nearly identical in shape, but marked now with a small silver band near the handle. It was a silent nod to all that had been broken and rebuilt. As she walked, people moved aside, not just to give her space, but to witness. The quiet deepened, cameras lifted, and a few clutched hands to their chests. She didn't wave, didn't smile for the crowd, didn't even pause, but her presence alone cracked something open. When she reached the front, she didn't take the stage, she stood just beside it. She didn't need elevation to be seen. Darren followed a few minutes later, flanked by two other community leaders, a local reverend and a school principal. His expression was unreadable, his uniform crisp, but those who knew him saw the weight beneath it. He took the mic and let his eyes scan the crowd. "Pinebrook," he began, "this is not a rally against someone. This is a rally for what we need to become." He paused to let that sit. Over the last week, we've heard what many already knew, that something broken doesn't always look shattered. Sometimes it looks like policy. Sometimes it sounds like a question asked one too many times. Sometimes it feels like silence when you needed someone to speak. He nodded toward his mother, then toward the teens who had organized the event. The young people called this gathering Rally at the Heart, and I think they were right, because the heart of a town isn't its buildings. It's not its laws, it's its people, and we can't beat with half of us aching. The crowd broke into quiet applause. It wasn't loud, it was respectful. Like everything said next mattered more. One by one, others approached the mic. A grandmother described being followed through a grocery store. A high school senior talked about the fear of walking home with music in his ears, worried someone would take earbuds for arrogance. A pastor shared how his nephew, recently out of the military, had been questioned for loitering outside his own apartment complex. None of these stories were new, but now they were being heard. And then something rare happened. The mayor, who had remained quiet until now, stepped forward. Her face was tight, her voice controlled, but what she said shifted the tone again. "An oversight board," she began, "isn't a fix. It's a flashlight. And starting Monday, Pinebrook will have one, not just to review what happened, but to stop what should never happen again." There was a moment of stillness. People took it in. The mayor had never said those words aloud. An oversight board, real policy, not just promises. Eleanor remained still at the edge of the crowd. She didn't cheer. She didn't weep. But when Darren caught her eye, she gave a single nod. Not of celebration, of clarity. The rally was working. Seeds were finally being planted. As dusk settled over Pinebrook, golden light slid across the courthouse bricks, casting long shadows over the gathering that refused to disperse. The open forum had moved past speeches. It had become something rawer, more honest. People weren't just telling stories, they were reclaiming them. A young woman with curly braids and tear-streaked cheeks stepped to the mic, her voice trembling but clear. "I was 16, she said. My brother was 18, he was walking me home from rehearsal. We were stopped because someone said we matches a description. We were in church clothes." Her fingers gripped the podium edge. "He's never walked beside me since, not because of fear for himself." The crowd was silent, some closing their eyes. Darren stood to the side, arms crossed, watching, absorbing. He wasn't in charge here. No one was. That was the point. From behind the crowd, a few officers stood at the edge of the street, off duty, but watching. They weren't there to control the event, but they were part of it now. Some of them shifted uncomfortably when stories touched too close. Others nodded slowly, their faces unreadable. And then something unusual happened. A boy, maybe 11, 12, stepped forward. His jeans were too short, his shoes scuffed, but his voice rang with purpose. "My grandma is Eleanor Price," he said. "She taught me to read with her fingers. She tells me every morning, 'Walk like the sidewalk knows you're coming.' That's what she says." Laughter rippled gently across the space, but it wasn't mockery. It was release. The boy continued. "When the police yelled at her in the park, I wasn't there, but my dad showed me the video, and I asked him, why did they do that? And he said, because some people can't see what they don't want to." The boy looked up. "But I see her." A murmur of emotion swept through the crowd. Some wiped their eyes. Others nodded, arms crossed over chests, as if holding something in place. And still, Eleanor said nothing. But now she was sitting in the chair someone had quietly brought her, her hands resting on the cane in her lap. Her face bore no smile, no tears, just stillness, steadiness. Darren stepped up again. "That's what this is," he said, gesturing toward the boy. "It's about what we teach our children to see, and what we teach them never to accept." He turned to the table set up nearby where clipboards waited. "We're drafting the first public charter of the Pinebrook Civilian Oversight Board tonight. Names, signatures, commitments. This isn't symbolic. This is structural." Dozens moved forward. Some hesitated, but others went first. Within minutes, the pages began to fill. Teachers, parents, retirees, teenagers, black, white, brown. They leaned over those pages as if anchoring something permanent. Eleanor did not add her name. She didn't need to. When the light strung across the courthouse steps flickered on, casting warm halos above the crowd, Eleanor stood. Darren offered an arm. She waved it off gently and walked on her own, slow, graceful. And behind her name, behind her silence, something was finally moving forward. Eleanor Price sat on the edge of her bed in the early morning light, her hands folded gently in her lap. The cane lay beside her, its newly taped handle a fragile reminder of the moment everything cracked open. Her bruises had faded, but her fingers still trembled when they reached for it. The silence in the house felt heavier than usual, as if even the walls were trying to avoid speaking about what had happened. She took a deep breath, then another, before finally standing. It had been 6 days since the officer's hand cracked across her cane and sent her sprawling. 6 days since the sound of boots and barked demands pulled her dignity from her in front of half the neighborhood. And yet here she was, steady, wrapped in her full Sunday coat and headscarf, stepping toward the door once more, not because she wanted to forget, but because she refused to disappear. Outside, the sun was rising in slow gold streaks across the tops of the trees. The same park waited just a few blocks away, still humming with the sound of laughter and runners and wind through the old oaks. She had walked that path with her husband for decades. She had walked it alone, too, and now, despite it all, she would walk it again, not as a victim, but as herself. Each step was deliberate. She tapped the cane slowly ahead, navigating the familiar sidewalk with practiced precision. Her heels echoed against the concrete, unhurried and proud. A neighbor waved gently as she passed, and a child on a scooter paused to let her by. She nodded, but kept moving. Her body was still sore, but her spirit walked taller than it had in days. At the park entrance, she paused. A wind lifted the edges of her scarf, brushing her face like a whisper. She tilted her chin slightly, as if listening for something she couldn't yet name. The same bench still sat beneath the trees. The same breeze still ran its fingers through the grass, but something had shifted. The moment she stepped through the gate, it wasn't just a stroll. It was a return, a reclamation, a quiet, burning refusal to be erased. The officer might have tried to define her with suspicion, but she would define herself with presence. She found her seat beneath the wide oak, a familiar spot nestled just between light and shade. Her fingers trailed along the wooden bench as she sat, and when she settled in, the world seemed to hold its breath with her. Not out of fear, but in reverence. Her quiet was no longer silence, it was power. Darren Price stood in his office, the blinds still drawn, the early morning sun slicing through in muted beams. A thin stack of papers sat on his desk with a post-it stuck on top, just a name and a time. He hadn't touched them. Instead, he stood by the window, one hand resting against the pane, the other holding his badge, turning it over again and again, like it would give him an answer. He hadn't slept more than 3 hours the night before. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his mother pinned against that wall, her cane broken on the concrete like trash, her voice quiet but unbroken, the raw tremble of her fingers as she tried to pick herself back up, and the silence, the awful, deafening silence of a crowd that couldn't believe what it was seeing. The phone rang. He let it ring once, twice, then picked it up. The voice on the other end was calm, measured, like it was reading from a script. It was the chief's assistant. Captain Price, the sheriff would like to formally discuss a future track. He's impressed. You've handled this matter with rare restraint and visible integrity. If you're open, there may be a path to deputy chief within 2 years. Darren didn't speak. Would you be available this Friday? He answered without thinking. Sure, I'll make time. But when he hung up, he didn't move. He just stared at the badge again. This wasn't what he wanted. Not like this. Not because the media spotlight had turned his name into a trending topic. Not because the department wanted to polish its image by elevating the black captain who had stepped in during a crisis. Not as a symbol, not as a cover. He wanted to earn his place with his values intact. But now, everything felt tainted. Like a promotion would be a reward for surviving betrayal. And worse, accepting might mean sitting next to the same men who looked away when Knox's record first raised red flags, sitting in silence while others buried complaints in filing cabinets. Would he change things? Or would he become one more layer of quiet? That night, he didn't go home right away. He drove to his mother's house, no warning, just parked in front and stared at the porch light glowing softly in the evening dusk. She was already outside, sitting in her rocking chair, wrapped in that same cream shawl she always wore when the wind turned cold. She didn't look surprised to see him, just looked up with that same calm that had carried him through childhood's storms. He stepped up onto the porch. She didn't ask why he came. He sat beside her. I got offered a path up, he said quietly. They're fast-tacking me. Call it recognition, respect, or damage control. She rocked in silence. He continued. If I say yes, I'll be in meetings with men who saw what happened and didn't say a word. I'll be at tables where policy is made by people who've never once questioned how their silence shapes our pain. I don't know if I can be part of that machine without losing something. She turned slowly toward him. Maybe, she said gently, Your job isn't to change everything at once. Maybe your job is to make it impossible to stay the same." He didn't respond right away, just watched the wind shift the trees. She reached for his hand, squeezing it with more strength than he expected. "You don't need to wear their shame," she whispered. "You just need to tell the truth, about loud, every time. That's the weight, and that's the work." He nodded slowly. A long silence settled between them, not empty, but full of every truth they could not yet name. The next morning, the headlines came fast, each one sharper than the last. Disorder. Results under mile. Results 1 grim. He looked at her, now in a simmering grin. Captain Price intervene, sparks reform push. Officer Knox suspended following viral incident in Pinebrook Park. Civil rights groups call for state oversight. On every screen. Following? Laptops, news tickers. There was Eleanor Price's name, sometimes misspelled, sometimes paired with words like allegedly, alleged assault victim, or just woman with cane. None of them said what Darren knew, that his mother, quiet and dignified, had been violated, and now her pain was being sliced and repackaged for public consumption. But it wasn't just noise, it was moving. Within 48 hours, the department announced sweeping policy changes. Officers would be required to complete annual de-escalation training. A new protocol would be introduced for interactions involving citizens with disabilities. The county commissioner proposed the formation of a civilian oversight board with investigative powers, and several ranking officers, 2 lieutenants, 1 long-tenured captain, submitted their early retirements. Darren read the memos one by one. None mentioned Knox by name. None acknowledged systemic failure. They all spoke the language of proactive review, renewed transparency, and ongoing commitment to equity. Empty phrases dressed up as accountability. Still, they were cracks, small ones, but real. That night, Darren couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling of his bedroom, the hum of the air conditioner loud in the quiet. He had taken his promotion meeting. He had shaken hands with people who still refused to say they'd been wrong. He had nodded, cautiously, when they promised resources for training and better hiring. And now, lying in bed, the weight sat on his chest like a stone. He turned onto his side, but sleep didn't come. So he rose, barefoot, on cool floorboards, and made his way into the kitchen. He poured water, sat at the table, and didn't drink it. He just stared at the glass. Inside it, the light from the street outside refracted into sharp angles. That's what it felt like, his whole world, bent under scrutiny. In the distance, a dog barked. A car passed slowly. He thought of Eleanor, her slow walk back to the house that morning after the attack, her bruised hands, the dignity in her silence. He thought of the crowd gathering that day, of the bystander whose footage went viral, of Knox's eyes full of entitlement and fear, and of the way his own voice had carried when he'd told him to step away from his mother. There were things he would never forget. He could feel his body wearing them now like armor and weight, not just as a captain, not just as a son, but as a man standing in a system that demanded compromise and silence, and deciding each day not to give in. Outside the window, the streetlights flickered once. Then, stillness. He whispered to the room, unsure if it was a promise or a confession, "We're not going back." And in the silence that followed, the city breathed, unchanged yet undeniably shifting. The air was soft that morning in Pinebrook, like the neighborhood itself had taken a deep breath. The lawnmowers buzzed in the distance, dogs barked behind wooden fences, and the laughter of children floated like wind chimes on a breeze. Summer had settled back into its rhythm, the kind of rhythm that hides cracks beneath the surface. Quiet, but not always peaceful. On Magnolia Avenue, the same stretch where everything had unfolded, where a woman's cane had snapped like a lie breaking in half. Everything looked normal again, but it wasn't. Eleanor Price sat on her porch as she did every morning, Her rocking chair creaked with each slow, deliberate motion. An old rhythm returned, but never again the same. The porch boards beneath her had once held her sorrow, her dignity, and the full weight of public shame. Today they held something else, a stillness, not of silence but of memory, of survival, of meaning. Across the street, a boy kicked a red ball into the gutter and giggled as it rolled back. The old man who fixed clocks waved from his doorway. A neighbor clipped roses. On any other day, these might have been invisible, just background noise. But now Eleanor heard them differently, with sharper ears, with fuller knowing. The park where it happened, the one behind the elms, stood 2 blocks away, still freshly paved. A new ADA-compliant path had just been added. City crews were out the week before, replacing signage, repainting the crosswalk lines, and installing a new bench. This one bolted into concrete, placed facing the sun. The plaque under it now read, she had not asked for that bench, had not wanted it, but it was there and it carried weight. Today, though, she stayed on the porch. The cane that once belonged to her late husband rested across her lap. Not the broken one, this was the new one, customized, durable, beautifully designed by a local woodworker who sent it anonymously. It had her initials carved at the base, EP, and a second inscription burned just beneath, I see myself. The phrase had become something of a rallying cry around town, painted on signs during the town hall protest, whispered in council meetings, echoed in school classrooms. But to Eleanor, it wasn't a slogan. It was a reclamation of space, of voice, of vision. She tilted her head and listened, really listened, to the sounds of normalcy. The garbage truck, the cicadas, the distant hum of the train. It reminded her that life after pain does not scream. It whispers, and that whispering is what most people never hear. Until they have to. Eleanor didn't look up when she heard the crunch of shoes on the gravel path. She already knew the sound. Her son walked with intention. Always had. Even as a boy, Darren Price had moved like someone chasing something just out of reach. First a basketball, then a badge, now something bigger than both. He stepped onto the porch with the weight of a man who'd seen behind the curtain and hadn't turned away. He held a bottle of cold tea in one hand and a folder tucked under his arm. The badge clipped to his hip gleamed just slightly in the morning light. Mind some company? He asked, already halfway to sitting beside her. Eleanor shifted slightly to make room, but didn't stop rocking. You're always welcome here. Just don't expect me to get up and fix you a plate. He chuckled, cracking open the tea. I already learned not to come between you and your chair. There was a beat of silence between them, comfortably familiar. She glanced sidewise at him, then returned her gaze to the street. Busy day? She asked, though she already knew. Darren exhaled. Yeah. The new oversight board charter's almost finalized. Policy updates got approved last night. Useful food standards, mandatory reporting on pedestrian stops, and a standing community complaint line. They're even talking about body camera reform with real teeth. Eleanor nodded, slow and deliberate. You finally got them to listen. He looked down at the folder in his lap. They're listening now, but it won't stay that way on its own. It's going to take everything, constant pressure. And you? She asked, her voice soft. What's it going to take from you? Darren didn't answer right away. He stared out across the lawn. The kids from earlier had moved further down the block, chasing each other with water guns. A woman across the street watered her flowers. I've been asked to step into a higher role, he said eventually. Assistant chief. It'd mean a bigger platform, but also less time in the field, less contact, more politics. I've spent weeks thinking about whether it's worth it. Eleanor stopped rocking. He looked at her now. I don't know if I'm helping more by staying in the fight or by rising above it. There's backlash, even from inside. They call me soft, say I betrayed my own. And what do you say to them? She asked. He shook his head. I haven't figured it out yet. She let the stillness fill the porch before she spoke again. "Darren, when I was your age, I thought survival meant keeping your head down. That's what your father used to believe too, that if we were quiet enough, we'd be safe. And now?" She met his eyes. "Now I know better. I know silence was never safety. It was only delay." He nodded slowly. "You think I should take it? The promotion?" She didn't answer directly. Instead, she reached out and placed a hand gently over his. "You already made it impossible for this place to stay the same. Whether you wear a different title or not, don't forget why you started. Don't forget what they saw you do when it mattered." He swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling like a second badge on his chest. She leaned back in her chair again, eyes returning to the street. "Sometimes, changing everything isn't your job. Sometimes, it's just making sure the truth doesn't get buried. You've already done that." Darren looked at her, really looked at her, and for a moment, he didn't see his mother as just a survivor of that day in the park. He saw her as a compass, a still, steady guide who had never stopped resisting, even when the world told her to shrink. He sat with her in silence, both of them listening to the sounds of the street, the quiet music of a world that was in some small way trying to shift, trying not to forget. That night, long after the porch had emptied and the streetlights flickered on, Eleanor sat alone again, this time without her cane at her side. Her eyes scanned the quiet. She didn't need to see, to feel the change. Her chair creaked gently beneath her as a summer breeze passed by. She rocked slowly, deliberately, her hands folded in her lap. She could still feel the bruise on her ribs, but she could also feel something deeper, something unshakable. "I saw myself," she whispered into the stillness, "and that was enough." Not justice on paper, not headlines or promises, just the reclaiming of her voice, her right to exist in peace, to move through a park without fear. She didn't need the world's permission. She never had. A porch light clicked on beside her. Its glow stretched out across the steps, casting long shadows toward the sidewalk. Then, silence. Only the sound of cicadas, a lone car in the distance. Her rocking chair stilled. But her presence remained, etched into that porch, that street, that moment in history. A testament not to anger, but to endurance. A resistance that asked for nothing but to be seen, and in being seen, changed everything.